Hello everyone and welcome to the lecture on AWS Audit Manager. So this lecture will contain all these topics. What is AWS Audit Manager? Features of Audit Manager, AWS Audit Manager assessments, control domains, data source, evidence, resource compliance, service in scope and framework. So what is AWS Audit Manager? AWS Audit Manager helps users continuously audit their AWS usage, simplifying risk management and compliance with the regulations and industry standards. The service automates the process of collecting evidence, making it easier to assess the effectiveness of policies, procedures and activities controls. Audit Manager provides pre-built frameworks that structure and automate assessments for specific compliance standards or regulations. These frameworks include a collection of controls with descriptions and testing procedures. Users can also customize frameworks and controls to support internal audits based on their specific requirements. Assessments can be created from any framework, allowing users to evaluate their compliance with various standards and regulations. When an assessment is created, Audit Manager automatically runs resource assessments, collecting data from the AWS account and services defined as in scope for the audit. The collected data is automatically transformed into audit-friendly evidence and attached to the relevant controls, helping users demonstrate compliance in areas such as security, change management, business continuity, and software licensing. The evidence collection process is ongoing and starts when an assessment is created. After completing an audit, users can stop evidence collection by changing the status of their assessment to inactive. Features of Audit Manager. So get started quickly. So you can create your first assessment by selecting from the gallery of pre-built frameworks that support a range of compliance standards and regulations. Then initiate automatic evidence collection to audit your AWS service usage. You can upload and manage evidence from hybrid or multi-cloud environments. So in addition to the evidence that Audit Manager collects from your AWS environment, you can also upload and centrally manage evidence from your on-premises or multi-cloud environment. You can choose one of the AWS Audit Manager standards frameworks. These frameworks provide pre-built control mappings for common compliance standards and regulations. These include CIS Foundation Benchmark, PCI DSS, GDPR, HIPAA, SOC 2, GXP, and AWS Operational Best Practices. Use the Audit Manager dashboard to view analytics data for your active assessments and quickly identify non-compliant evidence that needs to be remediated. Use the Evidence Finder feature to quickly find evidence that is relevant to your search query. You can generate an assessment report from your search results or export your search results in CSV format. You can create your own control from scratch or customize an existing control to meet your business needs. You can also use custom controls features to create risk assessment questions and store the responses to those questions or query as manual evidence. You can create your own frameworks with standard or custom controls based on your specific requirements for internal audits. You can share your custom Audit Manager frameworks with another AWS account or replicate them into another AWS region under your own AWS account. You can delegate control sets to subject matter experts who can review the related evidence and add comments and update the status of each control. You can generate assessment reports that summarize the relevant evidence that is collected for your audit and link to folders that contain the detailed evidence. You can store your evidence in a secure location where it remains unaltered. Okay, let's see a bit more detail about assessments. An assessment in AWS Audit Manager is based on a framework which is a grouping of controls related to your audit. Standard frameworks contain pre-built control sets that support specific compliance standards or regulations. Custom frameworks allow you to customize and group controls according to your internal audit requirements. Using a framework as a starting point, you can create assessment that specifies the AWS accounts and services to include in the scope of your audit. When you create an assessment, Audit Manager automatically starts assessing resources in your specified AWS accounts and services based on the controls defined in the framework. Audit Manager collects relevant evidence and converts it into an auditor-friendly format. The collected evidence is then attached to the controls in your assessment, and when it is time for an audit, you or a delegate of your choice can review the collected evidence. The reviewed evidence can be added to an assessment report, which will help demonstrate that your controls are working as expected. Evidence collection is an ongoing process. It's a continuous process that starts when you create your assessment, and you can stop evidence collection by changing the assessment status to inactive or by changing the status of your specific control within your assessment to inactive. So you can either hold the whole evidence collection to be inactive or the control to be, you can make it inactive. So one of them you can make it inactive. So next we'll see control domains. So you can think of control domain as some kind of a general category of controls that is not specific to any specific framework. And control domain groupings are one of the most powerful features of Audit Manager dashboard. Audit Manager highlights the control in your assessments that have non-compliant evidence and groups them by control domain. This enables you to focus your remediation efforts on specific subject domains as you prepare for an audit. So there are a total of 15 control domains, so I'll quickly walk you through all of it. First one is business continuity and contingency planning. So this talks about how you establish processes and that protect critical business operations from the effects of major system and network disruptions. Next control domain is change management. This is how you test, approve, implement and document changes to your cloud infrastructure. Third control domain, data security and privacy. This is about how you secure the privacy, availability and integrity of your data. Fourth domain is development and configuration management. This is about how you maintain your cloud infrastructure in a desired and consistent state. Fifth one, governance and oversight. How you align your use of cloud computing with your legal, regulatory and ethical obligations. Sixth domain is identity and access management. This is about how you ensure that the right users have the appropriate access to your technical or cloud resources. Seventh one, incident management. This is about how you establish responsibilities and procedures that ensure a quick and effective response to security incidents. And eighth one is logging and monitoring. This is about how you review your user activity for indications that unauthorized activity was attempted or performed. Ninth one, network management. This is about how you administer and operate your data network using a network management system. 10th one, personal management. So this is about how you assess and manage personal security risks at the whole organizational level. Then 11th one, physical security. How you detect and prevent physical security issues in your facilities. 12th one, risk management. This is about how you evaluate potential risks and losses and how you reduce or eliminate such threats. 13th one, supply chain management. This is about how you identify, assess and mitigate the risks that are associated with IT products, vendors and supply chain. 14th one, user device management. This is about how you reduce the risk that your employees' IT hardware is lost, damaged or compromised. And 15th is vulnerability management. This will define how you so this talks about how you define, assess and remediate all the known vulnerabilities for the assets within your AWS cloud infrastructure or cloud infrastructure in general. Okay, next important concept is data source. Audit Manager uses a data source to collect evidence for a control. The following terminology describes what a data source is and how it works. A data source type defines where Audit Manager collects evidence from a control. So if you upload your own evidence, the data source type is manual. If Audit Manager collects the evidence on your behalf, the data source type is one of the following. It can be one of the following. It can be AWS Security Hub, AWS Config, AWS CloudTrail, or AWS API calls. So there are currently 4 services which it can collect evidence automatically or on your behalf: Security Hub, Config, CloudTrail, and API calls. The Audit Manager API refers to a data source type as, so it can be one of them, source type, which is for singular, or it can be control sources, which is for plural for multiple sources. Okay, next concept within data sources is a mapping. A mapping is a specific keyword that relates to a data source type. For example, this could be a CloudTrail event name or an AWS config name. The Audit Manager API refers to this as a source keyword if it's a singular, or control mapping sources if it's a plural. Next concept within data source is a data source name, which is a name that is given to a data source. So in other so a data source name labels the combination of data source type and mapping. So in other words, a data source name basically labels the combination of a data source type and a mapping. And for standard controls, Audit Manager provides a default data source name such as data source 1, data source 2. So this is just a default data source name. And so if you are manually uploading or something, so this is standard controls. And for this is the standard, like 4 services. And for custom controls, you can provide your own data source name. This might help you to distinguish between multiple mappings that fall under the same data source type. The Audit Manager refers to a data source name as a source name. So basically, I just want to correct myself. So for a standard controls, it's not related to how you upload or something. It's a standard default data source name. It will give data source 1, 2. But you can have your own custom control. So then you can provide your own data source name. If you don't provide, it will just put 1, 2, data source 1, data source 2. Okay, a single control can have multiple data source types and multiple mappings. So control basically ties your data source type and a mapping, and it can have multiple data source types and multiple mappings. Okay, so we'll see all the 4 AWS services being data source. So first one is AWS Security Hub, and use this data source type to capture a snapshot of your resource security posture. Audit Manager uses the name of a Security Hub control. So in Security Hub, there is a feature called control. So name of the Security Hub control as the mapping keyword, and reports the result of that security check directly from Security Hub. So example can be 1.1 - avoid the use of root account. So this is within Security Hub control, and this will be pulled into Audit Manager. So next example, for example, AWS config service, and use this data source type to capture a snapshot of your resource security posture. Audit Manager uses the name of an AWS config rule as the mapping keyword, and reports the result of that rule check directly from AWS config. So for example, it could be EC2 instance managed by SSM. So under AWS config, there is a control or a config rule like this, and this will show up in Audit Manager. Next, AWS CloudTrail. So use this data source type to track a specific user activity that is needed in your audit. Audit Manager uses the name of a CloudTrail event as the mapping keyword, and collects the related user activity from CloudTrail logs. For example, user activity could be create access key. So this will show up in Audit Manager, but this information will be pulled from CloudTrail, and this is a CloudTrail event. Event name is create access key. And last one is AWS API calls, and use this data source type to take a snapshot of your resource configuration through an API call to a specific AWS service. Audit Manager uses the name of API call as the mapping keyword, and collects the API response. For example, EC2 describes security groups. So this is the API call which was made, but this API call can be tracked, or can be reported, or can be audited through the Audit Manager. So next we'll see evidence. So an evidence is a record that contains the information that is needed to demonstrate the compliance with the controls requirements. Example of evidence include a change activity invoked by a user and a system configuration snapshot. So these are two examples. So evidence, there are two main types of evidence in Audit Manager: automated evidence and manual evidence. Automated evidence, this is the evidence that Audit Manager collects automatically. This includes the following three categories of automated evidence. First one, compliance check. So first category under automated evidence, the result of a compliance check is captured from AWS Security Hub, AWS Config, or both. So these two services only, Security Hub and Config. Examples of compliance checks include a security check result from Security Hub for PCI DSS control, and an AWS config rule evaluation, for example HIPAA control. So you can see more about AWS config rules and Security Hub controls under their respective documentation. So these are the two examples. So one falls under HIPAA control, and one for the AWS config falls for the payment card industry PCI DSS control. Okay, next category is user activity. So user activity that changes a resource configuration is captured from CloudTrail logs as that activity occurs. So examples of user activities can include, for example, route table update, and Amazon RDS instance backup setting change, and S3 bucket encryption policy change. So these are all CloudTrail event names which will be shown up in AWS Audit Manager, and name of event is exactly what is being registered in CloudTrail. And third category is configuration data. A snapshot of the resource configuration is captured directly from an AWS service on a daily, weekly, or a monthly basis. Example of configuration snapshot include a list of routes for a VPC route table, an Amazon RDS instance backup setting, and an S3 bucket encryption policy. So these are the API calls which are supported by AWS Audit Manager. So basically any API call which changes some kind of configuration data will be captured by Audit Manager. Okay, and last, now we have seen automated evidence. Now manual evidence. So this is the evidence that you add to Audit Manager yourself manually. There are three ways to add your own evidence. One, you can import a file from Amazon S3, upload directly from your browser, upload a file, or you can enter text responses to a risk assessment question. Okay, next we'll see resource compliance. Resource compliance refers to the evaluation status of a resource that was assessed when collecting compliance check evidence. Audit Manager collects compliance check evidence for controls that use AWS config and Security Hub as a data source type. Multiple resources might be assessed during this evidence collection. As a result, a single piece of compliance check evidence can include one or more resources. You can use the resource compliance filter in evidence filter to explore compliance status at the resource level. After your search is complete, you can then preview the resources that match. After your search is complete, you can then preview the resources that match your search query. So in Evidence Finder, there are three possible values for resource compliance. First one, non-compliant. This refers to the resources with compliance check issues. This happens if a Security Hub reports a failed result for the resource, or if AWS config reports a non-compliant result. Next one is compliant, and this refers to resources that don't have compliance check issues. This happens if Security Hub reports a pass result for the resource, or if AWS config reports a compliant result. And lastly, we have inconclusive. This refers to resources for which a compliance check is not available or applicable. This happens if AWS config or Security Hub is the underlying data source type, but those services are not enabled. This also happens if the underlying data source type does not support compliance checks such as, for example, manual evidence, API calls, AWS API calls, or CloudTrail. So let's see service in scope. So this is an AWS service that is included in the scope of your assessment. So when you specify a service as being included in the scope of your assessment, Audit Manager assesses that service's resources. Audit Manager can assess a large variety of resources from a service in scope. Some example resources include the following. It could be an Amazon EC2 instance, an S3 bucket, a user or role, a DynamoDB table, a network component such as Amazon Virtual Private Cloud VPC, security group or network access control list, and network ACL table. When you use the Audit Manager console to create or update an assessment from a standard framework, the list of AWS services in scope is pre-selected by default. This list cannot be modified. This is because Audit Manager automatically maps and selects the data sources and services for you. This selection is made according to the requirements of the standard framework. If a standard framework that contains only manual controls, no AWS services are in scope for your assessment and you cannot add any services to your assessment. Now let's see something about framework. An Audit Manager framework is a file that is used to structure and automate assessments for a specific standard or a risk governing principle. These frameworks help map your AWS resources to the requirements in a control. They include a collection of pre-built or customer-defined controls. The collection has descriptions and testing procedures for each control. These controls are organized and grouped based on the requirements of a specific compliance standard or regulation. For example, it can be PCI DSS or GDPR. So there are two types of frameworks in Audit Manager. First one, standard framework. So they are pre-built frameworks that are based on AWS best practices for various compliance standards and regulations. You can use these frameworks to assist with audit preparation. Then second is custom frameworks, customized frameworks that you can define in Audit Manager as an Audit Manager user. Then you can use these frameworks to assist with audit preparation according to your specific compliance business requirements or risk governance requirements. And that's all. Thank you.